Good morning. I'm Jesus Bañales from Spain, and I want to welcome all of you to this first scientific workshop on epidemiology and classification of cholangiocarcinoma. We have 3 speakers and then a final discussion and questions from the audience. The first speaker is called Jill Koshiol. She received her PhD in epidemiology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and subsequently joined the National Cancer Institute. She is currently a tenure-track investigator in the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Prevention. She studies the natural history of hepatobiliary cancers and the role of inflammation in these cancers to better understand how they develop and to identify new opportunities for cancer prevention and early detection. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. My task this morning is to give you a sense of the global burden due to biliary tract cancers using resources like SEER and GLOBOCAN. But I'd like to start by saying I'm going to talk about all biliary tract cancers, including intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, or ICC. We'll sometimes refer to this as intrahepatic bile duct cancer, which is a broader term, gallbladder cancer, or GBC, extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, or ECC, and ampulovator cancer, or AVC. So SEER is the Surveillance, Epidemiology, and End Results program. And this program collects and publishes data on cancer incidence and survival using information from population-based cancer registries that cover about 35% of the US. I'm also going to talk about NIH, which is the North American Association of Central Cancer Registries. This resource expands on SEER by including cancer data not only from SEER, but also from the CDC's National Program of Cancer Registries and the Canadian Cancer Registries. And in just a few minutes, I'll share some results from NICER using 38 different US-based cancer registries, representing about 85% of the US. GLOBOCAN is an online resource that gives you access to global information on cancer incidence, mortality, and prevalence from 36 different cancers and 185 countries across the world. So starting with GLOBOCAN, I know this figure is busy, but don't worry, I'll walk you through it, and there's a few main things that I want you to take away. What you can see is the incidence per 100,000 person years for gallbladder cancer on the left, extrahepatic bile duct cancer in the middle, and ampulovator cancer on the right. And it shows you these incidence rates by different places in the world, starting with Africa on the top, and then Central and South America, North America, Europe, and Oceania. And for each cancer site, you can see the incidence rates for women on the left and for men on the right. So what I want you to note is first that gallbladder cancer is the most common of these biliary tract cancers, focusing on extrahepatic biliary tract cancers, and also that there are sex differences in these cancers. Gallbladder cancer is somewhat unusual in that it's more common in women than in men, and you can see that by the bars on the left being longer than the bars on the right. Whereas extrahepatic bile duct cancer and ampulovator cancer show the more typical pattern where they're more common in men than in women. I also want you to notice that there are large geographic differences. In most parts of the world, these cancers are pretty rare, but there are hotspots where the burden is quite high, such as for gallbladder cancer, parts of Chile and northern India, and for extrahepatic bile duct cancer, parts of China, Japan, Korea, and Thailand. Now, because these cancers are rare, people tend to group them together just to try to get a more precise sense of what's going on in a way. And you can see one example of that here with mortality rates from selected countries for all biliary tract cancers combined in women on the left and in men on the right. And what you see is that when you combine all biliary tract cancers together, in many countries, overall, the mortality rates are going down in women, although there are some countries where they're actually increasing, such as Greece. In males, you don't see as steep of a decline in incidence, and in some places it's really more of a plateau. And again, there are some countries like Greece where the mortality is increasing. The problem with lumping all of these cancers together, although it can give you a general sense of what the burden, global burden of disease is that it hides variations in the trends for individual types of biliary tract cancer. So we wanted to get a better understanding of what was going on with the incidence of biliary tract cancer in the US. So we used data from NACER to evaluate demographic differences in biliary tract cancers by anatomic site. And that's what you can see here in this figure, where we break down the incidence rates for gallbladder cancer, intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, and ampulla of Vater cancer overall, and also separately for men and women. And just a quick note, the scale, the y-axis for these figures is per 1 million person years rather than per 100,000 person years, which is what I showed you previously. That's just so that we could have whole integers. I don't want you to get thrown off by that. So what you can notice is that for gallbladder cancer, the rates are going down overall, but that's really reflected by trends in women. In men, those rates have been stable from 1999 through 2013. For intrahepatic and extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, incidence rates have been increasing both in men and in women. And for ampulla of Vater cancer, those rates have been stable over time. Looking by racial ethnic groups, gallbladder cancer rates have decreased over time in all racial ethnic groups except for non-Hispanic blacks, where you can see the trends are going up over time. For intrahepatic and extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, rates have been increasing in all racial ethnic groups. And for ampulla of Vater cancer, the rates have been stable over time. We then broke these incident rates down by age and found that the decline in gallbladder cancer was really driven by the older age groups. And when you see the bottom line, you note that in that youngest age group, people age 18 to 44, there's actually an increasing risk over time. For intrahepatic and extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, the rates increased across all age groups. But for ampulla of Vater cancer, we see again a pattern that's a little more similar to gallbladder cancer, where there seems to be an increase in the younger age groups. So to summarize, for gallbladder cancer overall, we see a decrease in incidence over time, but that's really driven by declines in women and by older individuals. We actually see increasing incidence rates in non-Hispanic blacks and in people age 18 to 44. Intrahepatic and extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma rates are increasing across all sex and racial ethnic groups, and ampulla of Vater cancer rates are increasing among younger adults. So what does this mean for collaboration? Well, first, really important question is to try to understand what's driving these trends, and by understanding what's driving these trends, to potentially identify something that we can do about it. So we wonder if perhaps obesity might be accounting for some of these increasing trends in the youngest age groups and for ampulla of Vater cancer. And that's in part because it does differentially affect non-Hispanic blacks compared to whites, and obesity is increasing in particular among our children, which could affect potentially their future risk of developing cancer at younger ages. Another question is whether cholecystectomy might have some impact on the risk of cancer at other biliary tract cancer sites. And that comes from work that we actually did previously, combining that SEER cancer registry information with claims data from Medicare, where we found that people who had had a cholecystectomy had a small but increased risk of developing other biliary tract cancers outside of the gallbladder in the future. Now, whether that's because cholecystectomy reflects some exposure that puts the entire biliary tract at risk, or whether it's due to something that's particular to cholecystectomy itself, for example, leading to bile reflux because now you don't have a gallbladder to store and concentrate the bile, that we can't sort out, and we have to work together to try to understand if that's a possibility, and if so, why. So to understand, to try to evaluate what are the risk factors driving these trends, we really need to pool our resources, to work together and combine information from many different studies in order to have the number of cases, the power to evaluate these risk factors. One way to do that is using the Biliary Tract Cancer Pooling Project, which is an effort that combines data from 28 different prospective countries from all over the world and includes more than 2.8 participants with over 4,500 biliary tract cancer cases. But I'd like to also leave you just with one question that I think is important, which is how can we try to get at this apparent increase among the younger age groups? I find that really concerning, and I want to try to figure out how we can dig into that a little more. Can we, for example, use administrative databases like the Kaiser Permanente insurance databases in Northern and Southern California? Perhaps we could identify people who had obesity or gallstones or some other important risk factor as children and then evaluate what their risk was over time. But that kind of administrative database is limited by the fact that we move a lot in the US. So do we have enough follow-up time in those kinds of administrative databases to really see what the risk is, especially for rare cancers in young age groups, which are even more uncommon? Or is it perhaps a better strategy to conduct a case control study where we try to work together to recruit people who were diagnosed at young ages and match them to controls that reflect the population that they came from, and then ask, what kinds of exposures did you have as a child? What kinds of exposures do you have now, to try to understand what might be driving this risk? Or do you have other ideas? I think this is a great forum for all of us to get together and talk about these kinds of problems and strategize as to how we might come up with solutions together. So with that, I will thank you for your time and attention. Are we having questions now or saving? Saving them to the end. All right, thank you.